The cheers of 30,000 people encouraging international athletes at the stadium once intended as the Wembley of the North. The White City at Old Trafford staged top-class athletics meetings in the 1950s. Later, it welcomed international rugby players. Every week for over half a century, its bread and butter was greyhounds, motorbikes and later stock cars. But before the athletics and the greyhounds and the stock cars, the White City enjoyed a perhaps even more illustrious history. The stadium was built in 1928, but before that, this site was the scene of many great public events, beginning in 1831 with the construction of the Royal Botanical Gardens. The gardens were a place of resort for Manchester's upper classes. They were surrounded by a high wall to protect patrons from what was described as the vulgar gaze of the working classes. But in 1857 and again in 1887, the masses were positively encouraged to come in. Two great exhibitions were staged there, the likes of which Manchester has never seen before or since. On both occasions, vast crystal palace-like structures were built. The first, 700 feet long by 200 feet wide, contained the Art Treasures exhibition. 16,000 objets d'art were gathered, including paintings, sculptures, and even early photographs. The second, 30 years later, concentrated on engineering and industry. The number of visitors ran into millions.
They were oversubscribed for exhibitors. Everyone wanted to get in an exhibit, you know, and they really just had to pick the best out, you know. A lot of people were disappointed. They wanted to get in.
Bernard Nuttall is researching the history of the site for the Stratford Local History Society.
In 1886, in June, it was mooted. In a year, the whole thing was planned, the buildings were built. The exhibition lasted 5 months, and then it was all over, finished. The buildings were taken down, sold as scrap, and that was it.
One of the features of the exhibition was a representation of Manchester life, with the building of accurate copies of city buildings in the grounds. The attendants were even dressed in appropriate clothing. But the buildings, like every other feature, were demolished. It was in 1907 that the site first took the name White City. A pleasure ground, complete with funfair, scenic railway, restaurants and tea gardens, was built to replace the botanical grounds. The object, according to the management, was the innocent pleasure of the masses. But this venture was short-lived, and after the First World War, the area took on its sporting role. Despite the opposition of the local council, the White City became a greyhound stadium, at a time when dog tracks were going up all over the country. But it was after the Second War that the White City really attained prominence, albeit short-lived, as a sporting venue. Gordon Pirrie was just one of the great names in athletics who took part in a series of international meetings staged by the specially formed Manchesterian Club. At the first meeting in June 1955, Pirrie was trying to add another world title to an already impressive list of world records. He only failed narrowly to establish a new time over 3 miles. The man officiating at the finishing line that day, and at every other White City meeting, was Jack Kirkby. He remembers how the meetings succeeded in their aim of bringing top athletes to the north.
We've been a bit starved of sport like that. You know, it was all down south, etc. So we were very pleased when all the star men came up.
And what were the meetings like? What was the atmosphere like at the meeting?
Oh, wonderful, really. This place was packed. Just to see it now, you couldn't imagine. It was absolutely packed. In fact, they were climbing over the walls. You know, absolutely packed to the door.
The athletics continued until 1961, but plans to spend £100,000 to improve the stadium, which wasn't really big enough for the full range of events, were shelved. Apart from a flirtation with international rugby, the White City survived on stock car racing. A world final was held there in the 1970s, and on greyhounds. Perhaps not a very glamorous end, but at least it remained in use. That is until 3 years ago. Since then, there's been nothing. The Greyhound Racing Association, which owns the stadium, stopped racing because it could no longer pay. Now it's provisionally agreed to sell the site to a supermarket chain, a fate which is also to befall several other dog tracks in other parts of the country. Since racing stopped, the vandals have moved in, and a site where royalty has been welcomed, where legendary sportsmen have performed, and where millions have been entertained, is reduced to a shambling wreck.
When you consider that so many people have enjoyed it, now it's all coming to an end, and it's part of Stretford's history, it's part of Manchester's history. And I really think, something should be done where it could keep it going.
Probably somebody will be buying the ham over where Zatopek